helpful. Thank you for accepting my design change here.
Oh, I can tell there's a story. Okay, so thanks everybody for being here on another Friday afternoon to do these deep dive discussions. We're grateful to each of the people that speak to us and put in all the time in the preparation, and for the audience who always comes with lots of curiosity and great questions for the discussion afterwards. So happy to have Tom back presenting with us again. Um, this is not your typical subject matter in qualitative or quantitative circles of market research, but leave it to Tom to find something curious out in the world and connect it. Janet and I got to see uh, early thinking on this before it became this presentation, and we were both intrigued and we're like, oh, yes, please bring it to us. So Tom, who has been through brand management and understands like what are people looking for, how are they going to use it, and been doing independent research now for more than a decade. Um,
More than a couple of decades.
yeah, um, well experienced. Will bring a fascinating insight into this. And I know you like him. Some of you saw this maybe at QRCA in San Antonio. There's more because Tom is always thinking about what else and another connection and another example, and he's about to delight us. There you go. I'm going to turn off my camera. We'll turn them back on at the end to have questions. I will try and monitor the chat so that if questions pop up as Tom is going, I can raise them at the end. If there's something that we need to like stop to address a question, please do that. So like just turn off your mic and call it out
Yeah.
if it's something that needs to be dealt with in the moment.
Yeah. Or
Because
Laura, if
otherwise
you
we'll
see
lose the
something in the
context.
chat, if you see something in the chat that you really think I need to address before the end, just trample on in and stop me and we'll deal with whatever needs to be dealt with.
Okay, nobody has ever given me permission before to trample,
Oh
so
God.
I'm very excited. Um, but no, some things, the questions are much better in the context of the moment. So yes, I will. Thank you.
Okay. So let's go. So this is a topic that's interested me for a long time. It's an interesting set of skills and it's a very interesting subculture. And I've also long felt that, what I do as a qualitative researcher and what psychics do, there's something in common there. I think that we in market research can learn here. And that's what this presentation is going to focus on. So when I first started looking into this topic, which, seriously, which is probably about 20 years ago now, I very quickly came across this guy. This is Ian Rowland, one of Janet's countrymen. He's a magician, well known for debunking psychics. In fact, he's built a whole portion of his act around exactly that. He is, I think you could say, a recognized authority on psychic cold reading. He is, as I understand it, he's actually trained FBI agents in this. And perhaps most importantly, he's written a book on the topic. It was first published in 1998. It's had multiple editions since then. It is the definitive text on the subject. And I would say that he, along with a psychologist named Ray Hyman, they're really the go-to guys on this topic. Um, Interesting fact is that Roland is not the only well-known magician who's had psychics in his crosshairs. A lot of really well-known, really successful magicians have focused on psychic reading as well. James Randi, Chris Angel, Ricky Jay, Darren Brown, Penn and Teller, Jamie Ian Swiss, the great Harry Houdini himself, Banachek, the amazing Kreskin, to name just a few. All of them have had a lot to say on this topic. And I have read stuff they've written and I've seen interviews with them and I've even had some personal conversations with some of these guys. And that kind of brings me to the question that I suspect some of you have on your minds now, which is how have I learned about this topic? And what I'll tell you is that it is not hard. There are tons of books on this subject. There's information all over social media. There is information all over the internet on this. Some of it's credible and some of it's not, but still. Um, Talk to the people you know. You will be surprised at how many of them can, at the very least, share an anecdote or something like that. And then just look around your area. I guarantee you there's stuff happening. You just have to look for it, and there is no substitute for getting out there and rubbing elbows with people and seeing what it looks like close up. So I've been paying attention to psychics for a long time now. And it's only recently that I've had the nerve to kind of share my knowledge, but I want to give you a taste of what I've learned here today. I don't have time to tell you everything I've learned, but hopefully I can tell you enough to pique your interest. So my specific intentions for here today, I want to share some of what I've learned about this skill set. Um, I want to explore applications to market research. Particular focus is going to be on qualitative because that's what I do. And we'll talk about ethical considerations as well. I would very much like to talk about applications for quantitative research as well. I have some thoughts. I'd love to hear what those of you who are qualified in at that area have to say about this. I want to talk a little bit towards the end about applications to business development. We'll get to that later. What I don't want to do is I don't want to get into a conversation about whether psychic reading is, real or not, or about its good or, bad aspects or anything like that. Um, I'm not looking to put myself out there as an expert. I'm really not. I'm just an interested layperson. I certainly don't want to piss anybody off, but I will be sharing quite a few obscure cultural references. There will be a couple of really terrible visual puns and several pictures of cute dogs. Um, I think that it's reasonable for me to tell you about the biases that I have on this topic, because I do have them. Uh, I am a born skeptic. Ask my family, they will tell you. Believe it or not, I'm told that this can make me hard to live with. Um, I've never bought into that Augustinian ideal that faith is a virtue. I don't believe things without evidence. At least that is how I would like to think about myself. And ever since I learned about it from Mr. Geegan, my high school chemistry teacher, may he rest in peace, I've always embraced Aristotle's law of contradiction, which is that something cannot be both true and untrue. I do think there is such a thing as objective truth, so I guess you could say that I am not a postmodernist. The idea that, you have your truth and I have mine is one for which I don't really have a lot of sympathy. I also think that adopting unsupported beliefs is I'll call it bad intellectual hygiene. I think that if a person can believe one thing without evidence, that can become a habit. And while some might say that believing things without evidence is harmless, or that insisting on proof for any factual claim is a form of closed-mindedness, I will tell you in all candor, I don't buy that. So that's me. I hope I haven't alienated too many of you with that little screed. Um, so with all that, hold on. My Zoom is not cooperating. There it is. One little thing to point out, I've created a handout of my slides. The handout slides have quite a bit more detail than the slides you're going to see on the screen because I like to keep presentation slides pretty spare. There's a QR code at the end you can scan. Sends me an email. I'll send you the handout. So I'm going to spend just a few slides defining terms. Let's start with cold reading. I've used that term a couple of times already. It's called cold reading because, at least theoretically, the reader goes into the encounter cold without any prior contact or knowledge. If you want a more specific definition, I've got kind of a three-part one. I think it's about things like foretelling the future or reading minds. I think it's about obtaining information that can't be conventionally explained. And I think it would be fair to say it's something that's apart from or not explainable by science. Little more terminology. There are a lot of ways that the mystical arts are practiced and interesting terms for them. These are just a few of the tools and techniques that are used in this field. A little bit of clarification. Psychometry is the ability to obtain information about a person or an event by touching an object associated with them. It's very common for psychics to ask a client for their keys or their phone or some other personal object. Scrying, if you're wondering about that, is gazing at some kind of reflective or obscure surface. So it could be a crystal ball, but it could also be a mirror or a bowl of water or a flame or a cloud of smoke or something like that. These techniques are often combined. For instance, psychometry can be added to pretty much anything, and tarot and astrology are very frequently done together. Um, there are also a lot of terms for practitioners, literally dozens of them. If you get the handout, I've got a slide in there that shows 50 terms for people who do this sort of thing. For the purposes of simplicity, I'm just going to use psychics, but understand there are many, many other terms that could be slotted in. One more little bit about defining terms, real quick. The word client means something very different to a psychic than it does to us and in our field. And I want just to avoid confusion. Overall, the client is who is paying you. So if you're a psychic, their client is sitting right there at the table on the other side of the crystal ball. In our case, that's the participant on the other side of the table. At least that's the term I'll be using here. The client is somewhere else observing the research and, like I said, hopefully paying for it. Ted Kendall, the slide is for you. And the next one. I've come to understand that psychics are not monolithic. There's a lot of diversity in this field. Psychics see themselves in a whole variety of ways. There are those who genuinely believe they have some kind of a gift. There are those who focus less on paranormal claims and more on things like guidance. There are those who lean toward healing. There are those who get that psychic phenomena lack scientific validation, but they keep doing it because they see a benefit for their clients. There are those who do this as part of a gig economy approach. It's one of a whole bunch of things they do. There are those who treat it as entertainment. Many psychics do at least a little bit of this. They work parties and other types of events. I've seen psychics lots of times at farmers markets, yoga studio open houses, bars, you name it. And I've had a lot of interaction with them in settings like these. And then there are the opportunists and the fraudsters. I haven't encountered too many of them, but let's not be naive. They're out there. And just as there are different types of psychics, there are also different types of clients. People come to psychics with a variety of mindsets and a variety of needs. There are those who genuinely expect some kind of a supernatural experience. There are those who may not be convinced, but they're open to possibility. There are those who visit psychics during difficult times. They're looking for reassurance or guidance or closure or something like that. There are people who are just there to see what there is to see and to learn what there is to learn. That's probably me. There are those who just see this as a form of entertainment. That's probably also me. And then there are the cynics, who are going to psychics just to try to test them or trip them up. I haven't seen too much of this, but it's not completely unheard of. I would also like to put to rest some common misconceptions about how psychics are able to pull it off. There's this idea, oh, it's just body language and observation and generalization. And each of these things can play a role, but they are not the whole story. There's a lot of skill and technique that goes into this. This is a tough business and a very competitive one. You are not going to last if you don't have skills, particularly if you want to do it full time, by the way. So I've mentioned that I think there's some overlap here. There are some things we have in common, at least on the surface. Uh, Qualitative researchers and psychics, we both talk to people. We certainly ask a lot of questions. We get people to tell us stuff. We get people, we generate hypotheses and then we test them. We start with the general and we get more specific as we move through. We take narratives and we frame them and we personalize them. We take learnings and we repackage them into things that are actionable and insightful. And we focus on things like rapport and empathy. We call it unconditional positive regard in our field. There are also some important differences. Certainly, the intent is different. We're doing what we're doing for different reasons. And there are some ethical considerations that I'll touch on as I move through this presentation. So now that all of that is out of the way and you're all hopefully still awake, let's get to why we're here. Before I get into specific techniques, and I'm going to show you a whole bunch of techniques that psychics use, we really need to understand what guides those techniques. Whenever I want to understand a skill, the first thing I focus on are principles because principles inform practice. I have been thinking about this topic area for years now, and I've identified a whole series of principles that I think are essential for doing this successfully. I know a lot of you want to get to the specific techniques, we will, but understand that these principles are easily as important, if not even more important than the techniques that come out of them. I have divided these principles, sorry, because there's a lot of them, into four categories. You can call them meta principles if you want. I call them the four C's, and this is mine. I totally invented the four C's. I am very proud of it. Um, each of these C's has multiple sub-principles. And it's important to remember, by the way, not all psychics follow all of these principles. We can talk about that later if you want. So the first C is culture. Some of you may remember Jane Templeton. She was one of the very earliest pioneers of qualitative research. I knew her a little bit. She did most of her work in the 60s, maybe even going back as far as the 50s. She wrote a book. The thing I associate her with most is the idea that a focus group is a temporary community. And I think she was right about that. And I think that applies here as well. I think any kind of psychic reading is a temporary community. And as with any community, culture, the values that all the parties buy into, determines how successful that community is going to be. So what kind of cultural values are we talking to? I'd say the first one is collaboration. I cannot overstate the importance of this. This is one of the most important things that I've come to understand about psychic practice. A collaborative culture for the reading is essential. The idea is that the psychic and the client are doing this together. This is a two-way interaction. It can't just be the psychic talking and the client listening. And if you want to try to figure out whether the person you're observing is a professional or an amateur psychic, look for this. If they're trying to establish a collaborative culture, probably a pro. Skilled psychics will say that if a client is not prepared to collaborate with them on the reading, they will switch into counseling mode. They're not going to try to do anything spooky or anything like that. So here's another key cultural value, adaptability. Successful psychics know not to push a client beyond what's comfortable. They need to be able to change course. Flexibility is certainly important for us in our field too. I think this might be the first cute dog. And that's probably the most open-minded looking Westie you're ever going to see. But modeling open-mindedness is really important. What is sometimes called a possibility mindset. Both the practitioner and the client need to buy into this value. The idea that anything is possible, that unlikely and impossible things happen all the time, which is true, and that the human mind is capable of more than what we might think. So that's culture. Let's talk about connection. We have our own word for connection. In our world of qualitative research, we call it rapport. Establishing rapport, I think, is the priority at the beginning of any kind of qualitative research. And as our colleague and very good friend Kate Wagenlander Watson has pointed out, once you've established rapport, you can get away with murder. Rapport is a precious resource. It gives you enormous latitude. I've learned in my more than 30 years in qualitative that establishing rapport is very much a self-taught skill. You just kind of have to figure it out over time. And I think this is true for skeptics as well. However, all that said, there do seem to be some things that psychics particularly focus on when establishing connection. The first is they pay very close attention. When you're really watching closely, you can pick up a lot. You can pick up behavior, body language, facial expressions. All of these things play a role in establishing a meaningful connection. Second, listen closely. This may seem obvious, but no matter what situation you're talking about, the less you talk and the more you listen to what is said, to what's unsaid, to things like tone of voice, the more you're going to learn and the better you're going to connect. Successful psychics, like us, take a lot of pride in their observational and listening skills. Then there's empathy. Empathy, I've come to understand, is the probably difference between mediocre qualitative and research that's truly transformative. And I think that empathy is crucial in the practice of the mystical arts as well. A lot of clients who go to see a psychic are not expecting a supernatural experience. What they really want more than anything else is somebody to talk to. They might be lonely, anxious, they might be feeling depressed or vulnerable, they might be plagued by regret. They're often grieving and they're struggling to process and move past that grief. Many psychics are people of tremendous empathy and caring. They're not looking to hoodwink anybody. They're not looking to exploit anybody. They're looking to provide thoughtful and maybe even therapeutic conversation. We all want to be heard. It's also worth saying that there are practical benefits to empathy. A close relationship enables things like engagement. Things that are otherwise mundane can become profound when they're delivered in an empathetic environment. And also, when emotions are running high, people are more likely to forget what the psychic got wrong and remember what was correct, which we're going to talk about more a little later. There's the idea of the making the narrative personal. We're inclined to make everything all about us and our own internal dialogue. It's one of the reasons so many of the techniques psychics use are effective. If you want to create a strong personal bond with the person you're talking to, regardless of the situation, make as much of the conversation as possible about them. So taking things clients say about the world in general or other people, psychics turn those things and make them about the client themselves. So that's connection. Let's talk about credibility. This is definitely another thing that we have in common with psychics. Without credibility, without trust, we're certainly not of any value to our clients. There are two general aspects of credibility I'm going to talk about here. One is some specific actions that psychics take to establish credibility, and then the other thing is certain human psychological characteristics that psychics leverage in order to enhance credibility. So starting with some specific things they do, this is Groucho Marx, for those of you who don't recognize him. He is known for having said, "Who are you going to believe, me or your own lying eyes?" The first step in establishing credibility is often simply identifying skepticism and knowing how to break through it. Good psychics are very good at this. Then, if you are a smart psychic, you're going to preempt failure. Many psychics will supply some kind of a preemptive explanation for failure at the beginning of a session. They'll say, the information that's coming to us might not make sense now, but it will later. Or they might even say, I'm only human. I actually do make mistakes. Either way, getting out in front of the possibility of failure is a smart practice. Being able to show some qualifications or credentials can really be helpful as well. Psychics talk about their family history, about their years of experience and things like that. Certainly some sort of official looking certificate can take on importance and significance. There are organizations out there that will certify you as a psychic for about $100 and they'll give you a pretty certificate at no extra charge. I made this one myself in PowerPoint. It took me about 5 minutes. Many psychics will describe themselves as being board certified. They'll also, if they feel they can, talk about scientists they've worked with, and they'll spout, kind of sciencey language in describing what they do. So that's that. Let's talk about human psychological characteristics and how psychics leverage some of these characteristics. First of all, Homo sapiens, in case you don't know, is a pattern-seeking animal. We have an innate ability to find order in chaos, even when it isn't really there. This is an evolved trait. It's linked to our hunter-gatherer past. And smart psychics know how to harness our desire to find order in chaos. We're going to come back to this later, several more times. I will also point out that being able to find patterns in disorganized and confusing data is also essential in qualitative research. If you don't understand why that is, ask me about it later when we have some Q&A. This, for those of you who don't recognize him, is Reggie Jackson. Reggie retired from baseball in 1987. He had at that point established the career record for strikeouts in Major League history. That record still stands 40 years later. Reggie hit 5 times as many, he struck out 5 times as many times as he hit home runs, but the home runs are what we remember. And this is a foundational principle that's key to credibility in this field. People remember the hits and they don't remember the misses. If the psychic has established the right kind of culture, one of collaboration, flexibility, possibility, people will remember what they got right and what was wrong will be forgotten. They will also likely forget the process by which something that started out wrong turns into something accurate. Uh, Closely related is the idea of questions without answers. Unanswered questions make us uncomfortable. Uh, we also don't like experiences that we can't really explain or problems that don't seem to have a solution. And so often people go for a psychic reading because they've been seeking answers about something, something important to them, and they haven't had any luck and they're not willing to accept that. Um, why was my father always so angry? What happened to that kid who disappeared from school when I was in the third grade? Nobody ever talked about him again. Why did that friend dump me? Why did my parents never speak again after their divorce? Was that accidental death all those years ago really an accident? You know, a lot of these questions are connected with grief. And in situations like this, um, an answer, any answer, even a wrong answer, even a ridiculous answer, might be better than no answer. Unanswerable questions are one of the big factors that drive interest in the mystical arts, and one of the big reasons people who go to psychics do that, and one of the things that makes them particularly vulnerable. Okay, here's another thing that I've learned, and that is the power of stories. Things sound plausible, even ridiculous things, when they're embedded in a story. We're a storytelling species. There's something about a narrative that has relatable people and a beginning and an end and an emotional hook. So psychics use anecdotes, they use stories. If you've ever read any books by psychics, and I've read a ton of them, they are full of stories, and those stories are there to make the claims being made credible. I've also come to think that this has implications for us in our profession. You know, on one hand, stories are an invaluable resource for them. We collect them, we ask for them because they're an efficient way of learning about what's important to people. But I think we also have to be careful with stories. We have to be careful about not overweighting the data we collect in the form of stories as opposed to the data we collect in the form of more mundane conversation. That's also important. Here's another foundational principle. Slightly less than obvious is the sweet spot for psychics when they're trying to make things credible. SLTO is a term that psychics use when they're talking shop. They don't use it in front of us. But the idea is that vagueness is something that has to be calibrated. You don't get anywhere by making totally obvious statements, and completely out of left field ones are risky. No smart psychic's going to take that kind of a chance. But a statement that falls just below the threshold of duh in the right environment can seem genuinely insightful. Um, this is more easily said than done, and it's an area where I think intuition and experience count for a lot, because what's slightly less than obvious for one person might not be for somebody else. We're going to talk more about this later. And the final C is conjecture. By that, I mean guessing. That's what we're talking about here, but guessing doesn't start with a C. If you are going to make it in this business, you better know how to guess. Psychics guess a lot, but they guess carefully and deliberately. Blind guessing gets you nowhere. Smart guessing, the world is your oyster. I have learned that guessing is a skill, and it's a skill we can use in qualitative. We're going to talk about that more. Uh, if you're a psychic, you might want to try to check out a client before you meet them if you know about them in advance. You might check out their social media. You might find their loved one's obituary or something like that. But sometimes this isn't possible, and even if it is actually quite risky. Most psychics, in my experience, tend not to do this. What's more valuable is just having a good knowledge of the type of person that you're talking to so that you can make an informed guess. So if the person sitting on the other side of the Ouija board is a late 30-ish woman who's wearing expensive business attire, if you're a good psychic, you're already going to know a lot about people like that. Um, this, I think, is a principle qualitative researchers can make use of as well, although I think we have to be careful. Another principle that we share with psychics are acutely aware that words and meaning and significance are all separate things. And if you're going to guess skillfully, you need to be able to bear that in mind. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If a psychic says something like, I'm getting an image of a black car. Okay, we know what that means. The client knows what that means. The psychic knows what that means. It's a car and it's black. But the client's thoughts immediately jump to something much more specific. So the psychic has provided the words, the collaborative client has provided the significance, and things go from there. And that is why this next principle is so important. Anything can mean anything. All pronouncements are up for interpretation. Nothing a skilled psychic says is actually wrong. It's just a work in progress. And we have yet to understand what it means. The collaborative client figures out how to make something mean what they want it to. This applies to qualitative research too, by the way. When we, for instance, show stimuli, we need to remember that the language and the imagery in those stimuli mean whatever the participants want them to, and our responsibility as a researcher is to understand how they're interpreting those things and what kind of meaning and significance they're attaching to them. And so, as with a lot of things in life, when it comes to making guesses, it's not really about being right. The key to success much more lies in not being wrong. If you are not obviously, indisputably, wildly wrong, then you're not wrong. You have room to correct. You can make a statement that's not completely wrong, and that gives the other person an opportunity to collaborate with you on getting it to something that's right. And that's why, in many ways, a successful psychic cold reading is an iterative exercise in trial and error. Similar to the tactic of triangulating. You keep being wrong until all of a sudden you're right. Okay. You have all been very patient. At least I'm assuming you've been patient. If you haven't, I don't really know. But that's principles. I'm now going to get to the good stuff. I'm going to tell you how psychics do what they do. There are too many techniques that I've identified to go through today, but I'm going to share with you a selection. In each of these three categories, we're going to talk about artful vagueness. We're going to talk about some more direct approaches, and then we're going to talk about guessing skills. Some of these are probably going to look familiar to you. You're going to say, hey, I do that. Some of these are going to be things that I think we can steal from our brothers and sisters in the mystical arts, and some of them are totally on the wrong side of the ethical line, but I love them, and so I'm going to tell you about them. So vagueness, shrewd vagueness is a skill. It's something I think we both use. We deliberately start often with unspecific statements and questions because they're great conversation starters. Vagueness is a way you get things going, and then specificity comes later. You need sometimes to be a little patient. This is probably the most famous techniques that of all those that are employed by psychics, the Barnum statement. This is a vague general claim that seems personal and accurate to the person on the receiving end of it, but that can actually apply to anybody. So some examples. You want people to like you. You have untapped potential. You're generally private, but you can open up. You like variety. People don't get how deep you are. You've made some tough calls. Something's on your mind. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, oh God, Tom, these are so trite and so broad, nobody could possibly fall for this. I promise you, this is surprisingly effective. I do this in family situations, in social situations now. It's actually a lot of fun. I recommend you do the same thing. Try it. An important follow-up technique to this, by the way, a psychic will make a broad, vague statement, a Barnum statement. A client will affirm it and supply details. And then later on in the reading, 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, the psychic will circle back and take credit for a more detailed and correct statement. That takes chutzpah, but it works. Another interesting thing, by the way, that I've noticed about Barnum statements is that sometimes they don't just seem credible to the person on the receiving end, but also the person who made that statement thinks they just said something incredibly intuitive and brilliant. So a brief but very important detail. In case you're wondering, Barnum's statements leverage what's called the Forer effect. It's named for the psychologist Bertram Forer. That's him sitting there in front of that bookshelf that looks like it's about to fall down. Um, the Forer effect is the tendency to accept a description of your personality as being accurate and insightful because it is about you. It's a specific manifestation of a broader psychological phenomenon called subjective validation, which is a fancy way of saying that we tend to make everything all about ourselves. It's a cognitive bias, um, and it leads us to assume that a piece of information is correct if it has some sort of personal meaning or significance or applicability to us. It's also why we can believe that coincidental events are related. So a robin landed on my windowsill. A few minutes later, I got a call that a relative had passed away, and I assume that there's a connection because both of these completely independent events happened to me. Um, Subjective validation looms large over the whole world of paranormal phenomena. Our natural inclination to see ourselves everywhere is why all this works. You could say it's the engine that drives the whole process. Every time we look at a person or a situation, some small part of us thinks we're looking in a mirror. I think this is linked to our propensity for pattern recognition that we talked about earlier. And so when somebody says something to you like, oh, you can be very critical of yourself, there's an important part of you that wants to believe that they just said something really specific and really profound about you. So, back to our regularly scheduled programming, we can use this technique as qualitative researchers to get conversations going. I've used this. I get the feeling you're really trying to be a good dad. Who's going to argue with that? You're trying to make a smart decision here in this purchase. Nobody's going to argue with that either. These work. They're really good conversation starters. Just make sure you're not asking a leading question. That's kind of the ethical line you got to make sure you don't cross. But we can do this. Here's another really popular one. I call these split personality statements. They have a lot of names, but this is a real bread and butter technique. And the idea is that you credit a person with a personality trait, and then at the same time, it's opposite. So you might say, I see you as outgoing, loving the social situations, but you can also really need your alone time, can't you? You can't be wrong when you say something like this. You just gave them both poles of a continuum. There are countless variations along these lines. Somebody's, introverted and extroverted. They're responsible and a total screw up, whatever it is. Um, Pretty much all personality traits exist on a continuum. Very few people are kind all the time or nasty all the time. They're all in the middle. Uh, I've been using these kinds of statements in qualitative settings for a few years now. You know, I've said to people, I get the feeling, sometimes you love shopping, sometimes you could do without. Uh, the doctors love this one. Sometimes you really do empathize with your patients, but sometimes you're able to create more distance. They pick what they want to talk about here. They pick where between these two, poles they want to place themselves, and that's where they start to talk to you. Closely related is what's called the forking statement. This describes a situation with multiple possible scenarios. So no matter which fork events take, the statement's going to be correct. So a psychic might say, you've recently experienced a change in your life, or you're on the verge of one. You can't be wrong when you do that. We can do this too. This is a really good questioning technique, a really good way of getting a conversation started. But there's an important wrinkle, important ethical wrinkle that we need to add. So I have said to people in the course of a consumer electronics study, you've just bought a TV the size of a garage door, haven't you? Or you're thinking about it. So now I've hedged, I've protected myself. But then the other thing that I have to do is I have to give them permission to tell me I'm wrong. So I'll always add to this something like, or am I totally off base here? I was doing a study on rheumatoid arthritis about a year ago. And so I said to some of the patients that I was talking to, your meds are becoming less effective, aren't they? Or you're worried they might at some point. I've now given them whatever they want to respond to, and then I add on to that, or maybe you're not even thinking about this yet. Either way, again, conversation starters, really good. I mentioned earlier, slightly less than obvious is where psychics try to be. and that this is an art where experience counts for a lot. Getting psychics to explain how they do this, I have come to see, is really hard. And I don't think it's because they don't want to share with me how they do this, but because they don't really know. It's so intuitive. All that said, there are certain things that I have figured out psychics do to make things fall below, just below the threshold of obvious. Um, Here are a couple that I'm going to say, and both of these make something seem insightful by adding complexity to it. So a psychic might engage in what's called vague attribution. So they'll say something like, a presence in the room is indicating that something important wasn't said between you and a family member. The complicating factor is right there. It's the presence in the room. So it's not the psychic making that thing. It's an additional complicating factor. We do something like this, at least I do. I bet a whole bunch of you do as well. I all the time will say, somebody in the last focus group said, blah, 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 blah. What do you think about that? Another one is by a way of adding complexity is by referencing some sort of a transition. So a psychic might say, there's some tension between you and your partner, and there's been a shift. The shift is the complexity. There's almost always tension in some kind of tension in a relationship. The idea that there's been a shift is kind of that complicating factor. I've started doing this too. I like adding the idea of transition, of change to a question. So I did this a couple of years ago. I said to people, so sweet green's a great lunch idea for you, but do I get the feeling that that might start to change? Maybe I get that feeling and maybe I don't, but by adding change, the idea of change into the question, it's something more to talk about. It's another way to start a conversation. Here's another path to slightly less than obvious. George Carlin, the great late comedian, has astutely pointed out that you can make anything seem important if you just use more words to say it. So instead of saying we're boarding the plane, it's a boarding process. Instead of an emergency, it's an emergency situation. Instead of something happening now, it's happening at this particular point in time. Um, Nothing takes something that is vague and banal and makes it seem deep and profound better than just burying it in a bowl of delicious, crunchy word salad. A good psychic never underestimates the value of some smartly deployed gobbledygook. I once saw a mystic say to somebody, my third eye is sensing the quantum vibrations of your chakra. I enjoyed that so much, I immediately wrote it down. Um, this is actually something that I don't think is applicable to qualitative research. And in fact, I think it's the opposite. I think it's something we need to be careful about not doing. It's very easy to fall into jargon speak. It certainly is for me. I'm guilty of this as much as anybody. The undisputed king of word salad bullshit is, of course, Deepak Chopra. The man has made an industry out of it. He's a genius. How do you think he was able to afford those fancy sunglasses? I love listening to Deepak, even though I generally have no idea whatever the hell he's talking about, which is why I need to remind myself, as Julia Sweeney has observed, that Deepak Chopra is full of shit. Word salad at its core is BS. So while it can be useful to psychics, it's something that in our world I think we need to enjoy, but don't fall into the trap. So that's vagueness techniques. I'm going to show you a few more direct approaches. Some of these are even genuinely aggressive, and maybe also some of them ethically questionable. Two road statements. Sometimes they're called greener grass statements. They often link to regret. We all tend to think about the options in life that we didn't take. Life's about choices. You can't do everything. These kinds of questions about or statements, I think, might be good tactics for quantitative open-ended questions. Let's talk about that later. But, a psychic might say something like, your career has been rewarding, but maybe you wonder if focusing on family would have also been rewarding. It's kind of hard to be wrong in making a statement like that. And it starts a conversation because it's talking specifically about regret. I've done this. If you had known then what you know now, do you think you still might have gone for family medicine or maybe a different specialty? It's a great way to start a conversation. Two road statements. We can use those. Here's one that might be a little ethically questionable. That guy on the left side of the slide there, that is Rudolf Abel. He was possibly the most successful spy of the 20th century, and he's there because we're going to talk about elicitation. This is ninja level stuff. Elicitation is fascinating and it's sneaky and it's ethically questionable, and psychics do it. And it can have applications for us, but we need to be careful with it. I'm only going to touch on this briefly. I could talk a whole hour about elicitation. But elicitation is how we ask questions without asking questions. It's a way of asking questions in a way that somebody doesn't realize that they're being queried. So you can gather information from people without their awareness or maybe even their consent. So cops use it, military interrogators, intelligence operatives, psychics, all of them use these techniques. And what they leverage is people's desire to do things like to complain, to correct, to be helpful, or to look smart. So some specific techniques, that's another very successful spy, by the way. Expressing mutual interests. Oh, you're into butterfly collecting. So am I. What kind of net are you using these days? Playing dumb is a really good one. We can do this as qualitative researchers, and I won't tell you that I don't do it, but I try to be careful with it because you can cross the line into being dishonest. I don't love the idea of pretending I don't know something that I actually do, but I'm also not going to sit here and tell you that I never ever do it. Playing on the tendency to complain is a great thing to do. You know, whenever I talk to parents or kids, I'll just say something like, you know, wow, you know, it sounds like your parents are really putting you through it right now, and they're off to the races from there. Also, oblique references, and this is a really good technique for just about any kind of conversational situation. Saying as little as possible to get somebody to talk. So I once saw a mystic in a group discussion setting say to a woman, wow, family. That's all she said. This woman went off on a 10-minute diatribe, most of which I suspect afterwards she wouldn't even remember what she told this person. Here's another one that is very effective at winning people over. Blarney. We all like being told nice things about ourselves. But you've got to be nuanced in how you do it. You don't want to say to somebody, "Oh my God, you are so honest." You need to be more subtle. You need to say something like you have good values that you try to live up to. Nuance is really key. There are certain characteristics that psychics typically do like to flatter people on. And this is only a partial list. We can do this. We have to be careful. But I've done this with doctors. You know, oh, you're not just about you're about the whole patient, not just the disease. Almost every doctor, with the possible exception of electrophysiologists, will agree with this statement. I've done this in C-suite interviews, and I'll say to somebody, it's clear you put the needs of the business and your people before your own needs. I suspect that every time I have used this little bit of flattery, I didn't really mean it. It certainly wasn't true, but it can work. And if you're trying to break through people who are being difficult or reticent, a little flattery can go a long way. This is one specific kind of flattery that psychics use that I think we need to stay as far away from as we can, but just crediting somebody with having some psychic abilities as well. You know, so, you know, you say to somebody, you know, you seem particularly intuitive. Wow, you're empathic. You seem to have some sort of a sixth sense. Wow, you've got an amazing kind of radar, don't you? Clients eat this up. They love it. Last thing I'm going to talk about as for techniques is guessing techniques. Very closely related to, you know, the idea of making statements that are slightly less than obvious is making a smart guess. So some specific techniques. I talked about this a little bit before. Educated guessing. It's a core ability for psychics. You base it on what's known about the client, about their life stage, their gender, their career, socioeconomic factors. If you're talking to a person who is older, it is likely that they're thinking about people they've lost. So it's a pretty safe bet to say you've been thinking about somebody who's gone over to the other side. The older we get, the more people we've lost. We can do this too. I referenced before asking doctors about their specialty and whether or not they regret it. I happen to know that family medicine is down near the very bottom of the job satisfaction rankings for doctors. So this is a safe guess. It's an educated guess. If you're talking to people who own electric vehicles, particularly depending on the either the consumer segment or the specific type or brand of vehicle they own, pretty safe bet that they're not super duper happy with it and they're thinking about switching back. So not it's an educated guess. So we can do this. This is one that I really don't think we can do, but I love it nonetheless. And that is the guesses that are statistically likely to be correct, or at least close enough that you can refine and get to accurate. Um, so, a house with a 2 in the address, virtually guaranteed to be right. A name starting with an M or J, we all know somebody who has a name starting with that because it's the most common 2 letters that names start with. Most common place to have a scar is a joint. We're all thinking about making a change. Who hasn't been under some stress lately? Who's not feeling some anxiety? Who hasn't had some back pain or hasn't been sleeping well? Who hasn't had some layoffs? If you work for a company, honestly, you're going to tell me you haven't had layoffs. Of course you have. Um, so good chance guesses are things that I've seen psychics do a lot. Um, Shotgunning. That's firing off a wide range of guesses. I've particularly seen people do this in entertainment situations. So you've got a psychic or somebody like that on a stage in front of an audience, and they'll fire off literally like 15 to 20 guesses at the audience. And anybody who raises their hand gets to go up to the stage and possibly be a part of the act. This is crude, but under the right circumstances, it's really effective. More refined, but closely related, is the multi-part guess. So a psychic talking to somebody one-on-one might say something like this. You're thinking of somebody close to you. I'm seeing a date in August and maybe a pair of glasses. Anything in these 3 guesses that have been mashed together that's right is going to be remembered and is going to be fodder for conversation. The other 1 or 2 will likely be forgotten. This is a classic way of leveraging the principle that people remember the hits and they forget the misses. It's also quite effective when you combine it with things like Barnum statements or good chance guesses. You make a bunch of those things at once. I have used multi-part guesses a couple of times as a researcher. I did this late last year in a study. We were talking to rheumatologists about how they find prescribing information for drugs. And I actually wrote this question into my guide, but I said to them, I get the sense you don't like going to the manufacturer's websites. The package insert is useful, but overall, you're just not sure if the information in front of you is credible. And this gives your participant an opportunity to answer whichever one of those 3 questions you just asked they want. Now, I know this breaks the rule, theoretically, that we're not supposed to ask more than 1 question at a time. And so you need to make sure you're doing this for a specific reason. In this case, I was trying to establish priorities. And so it really worked well. So that's all the techniques I'm going to share with you. I hope nobody's head has exploded. All of this is in the handout, plus maybe a few extras. You never know. So I'll share some final thoughts, some things that I've been thinking about with respect to this topic area, psychic cold reading, and some of the implications that I've been considering. I alluded to this at the beginning. Business development is obviously on everybody's mind this day. It certainly is for me. It's tough out there right now. Hard to say when things are going to improve. So I find myself asking, what can we learn from this body of knowledge? And Lauren Ezeka, who I think is on this call, actually gave me the idea for this. So what can we learn from psychics? It seems to me that the real opportunity here is that of getting the most out of any opportunity to talk to somebody. Just getting into a conversation with a potential client is a real achievement, whether it's for 30 seconds in the exhibition space of a conference or on a catch-up call with somebody you haven't talked with. You want to maximize your chances of success. Before psychics try to do anything weird, they lay a foundation. They create a culture that's conducive to success. This makes sense. And there are definitely some cultural values that we can apply to business development interactions. So for instance, before you try to do anything else, try to establish rapport, try to create a bond. Um, Establishing some sort of sense of collaboration. Don't make it about you trying to sell somebody something, but make it that you want to collaborate with them, you want to work with them, and you want to do it in a way that is valuable to them. And that goes to personalizing things. Um, Make as much of the conversation as you can about the other person. Don't talk too much about yourself. That's for later. I'm not saying you should never talk about yourself, but I don't, at least to me, that's not the thing I want to do first. Um, Creating a sense of empathy, you know, feel their pain, internalize their challenges, feel what they're going through. And finally, establishing credibility. I think this is valuable. It's probably not as important initially as the things above it, but I think finding ways to establish your own credibility can really be important. So, some specific things that psychics do that we can apply here. What are those? Here are a few things that are initially coming to mind for me. And understand this is something that I've only just started thinking about, and I plan to think about this a lot more. But first of all, I think stories. We all know this. Stories are a powerful way to bond, to create empathy, to create rapport, maybe even to create credibility. Don't just share stories, ask for them. Listening to another person's story is an important way of showing that you value them and what they have to say. Smart guessing. Now, be honest. Don't pretend to guess at something that you already actually know. But if you've studied a person or their company or their industry and you know some things about it, extrapolating into a guess, it's not a bad idea. And then finally, these various vagueness tools, they might be applicable, they might be valuable. Be cautious, read the room, don't cross the line into being dishonest. But if you think you've established a nice level of rapport, one of these kinds of techniques could really be valuable in terms of starting the conversation and taking the conversation to another level. Now, again, keep your eye on the ball. The idea here is to start a good conversation, one that creates an opportunity for another conversation down the road. These are just my initial thoughts on this topic. I'd love to talk about this more with all of you, and that's going to be in just a few minutes. I'm also really interested in the topic that we talked about a little bit before, subjective validation. I think it's one of those really important pieces of software that's built into all of us. It's always running. And I think there are ways that we can harness it. So some thoughts I have on this. First of all, using evocative, maybe even ambiguous prompts can get people to see things as being about themselves. So if you say something like, which of these statements in this concept we just looked at feels like you? How does this description land for you? What part of what we were just talking about resonated for you? You're deliberately activating subjective validation to see how they construct meaning and find significance. Another way is to ask for, what's called selective resonance. So you can say, what part of this thing we're looking at here feels especially true for you? What part of this conversation that we've been having most spoke to you? What did you that we talked about? What immediately did you agree with? Or what did you immediately disagree with? Or what, thinking about, is there anything that you actually ignored? And if so, what was it? So the idea is that the selection itself is data, I think is really important. And then projection. We all do this. This is basic, ham and eggs qualitative stuff. But, if someone described you to a friend, what would they say? What kind of person do you think would use this product or service? This is the way people reveal beliefs about themselves indirectly and often more honestly. So that's pretty much it. Just a few final things that I have learned, unlike this French bulldog, because as I understand it, French bulldogs learn nothing. This is the final cute dog, by the way. Psychics fill a real need. There's a reason they're out there. There's a reason they may be the oldest profession, if not just about. We can learn things from them. They do things that we can copy. The idea of collaboration, I continue to be amazed by the way a skilled psychic can bring a client into the reading as a full partner. In some ways, maybe this is a little bit diabolical, but to be honest, it's also kind of beautiful if you've seen it happen. Guessing is a skill. Vagueness is a skill. Learn them both. Anything can mean anything. It's easy to forget that. It's important to keep it top of mind. Subjective validation is something I'm planning to focus on a lot more than I used to. And finally, Kate Wagenlander, already a pretty scary person, is even more so when she's holding a batleth. There are a lot of people who offered me a lot of help in creating this presentation. Judy Langer, Mark Engel, Maria Verobic, who has been saving me from myself for like 11 years now. My good friend Liz Miller, Laura Nozico, who had the idea about applying this to sales and business development. And finally, Nancy, she is the Morticia to my Gomez, as I say. She has been humoring my morbid fascination with this topic for quite a while now, has been dragged to a lot of events and has had to listen to me talk about this a lot. And furthermore, she just puts up with a lot. So, and finally, thank you to all of you for taking time out of your valuable day to listen to me flap my gums about this. If you want my handout, just scan this QR code and I will send it to you forthwith. And with that, I'm going to finish my cough drop and have a few sips of tea, and let's have some conversation.
This was fantastic, Tom. Everyone feel free to turn on your cameras now, and we can hang out a little. There was
Tom, that was so
going in.
good. Tom, that was so amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Jim Huan. I have to jump, but awesome. Loved it.
Talk to you soon.
Yep.
Yeah, a few people had to jump at the top of the hour and now, and they've already given their thanks to the content. So yes, much loved. There was one question towards the beginning when you were talking about, you had a slide up about culture and you referred to it and it slipped past all of us.
With my reference to Jane Templeton?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jane is one of the real pioneers in our field. I encountered her decades ago at some QRCA New York chapter events. And she wrote a book called, hold on. Yeah, here it is. Focus groups. You guys all see that? I have this book. It's not a very good book, but there's one thing in it. And I also have heard her say this well, I think she's long gone now, but I heard her say in person, a focus group is a temporary community. That may be the only really useful thing I took from this book, but in all honesty, it was gold. It really was. I've never forgotten that.
That is a good one.
And it has really broad implications. If you think of any kind of qualitative research interaction as a community, think about where that takes you.
We could have a whole session just on that, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
It's a different kind of MROC for sure. Before we go too far and more people have to jump, I just want to do a quick little plug here for Lauren, for everybody, but especially because Lauren's here today. She's going to be our next deep dive discussion presenter, and that's coming up on May 15th, which is also Teachers Day, but that has nothing to do with what Lauren's going to talk about.
She'll be teaching us.
She will be teaching us. She's going to talk about the use of AI moderation, and her presentation at QRCA was highly acclaimed, and we are delighted to get, I'm not sure if it's going to be an encore presentation or enhanced thinking. Either way, we're going to be delighted to have her, and don't miss it.
Yeah, more the latter. And we'll do, yeah, definitely won't. So I'll make it worthwhile for anyone that attended. Although Dean, because he now will have seen it 3 times, because I also participated in Seattle. It's going to be a high bar to keep you super entertained, but yeah, it's I look forward to it. There's a lot, and it's interesting, and it's on the topic of not just AI moderation, but through the lens of menopause. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I happen to believe that repetitive viewings of any material helps me figure out different aspects of it. Like today, I was struggling with something different, so I heard a slightly different aspect. So I always like to repeat listen, but that's probably more about me than the material. Anyway, back to Tom's fascinating conversation here. I saw a hand go up, Mr. Hawk.
Yeah. So I just want to say that I've noticed that you're bringing in all the people I had to speak across at the same time with at QRCA. I want you guys to recognize how incredibly talented this group of speakers were, and I'm not sure why I had to present at the same time
Is
as
this
all of them,
nuanced
but
flattery we're getting here
Lauren,
right now?
yeah, Lauren, Tom, Martha. I forget who the other one was for a second. I'm sure I'll remember. But all of them were amazing speakers. I would have gone to any of their presentations above mine anyway. So, so I'm glad that in this format I get to listen to Lauren next time and got to hear Tom this time.
Well, Chris, now you're letting the cat out of the bag that what we do is we look at what time you're presenting and then who else is opposing you on other stages. And then that's how we set up the agenda for deep dives.
I know. Yes, I can tell.
Oh.
It's also just a nod to just the sheer high level of presentations across the board at QRCA conferences, and why we give it a few months before we, try to bring them to a wider audience, because the quality is always exceptional there. So whoever you're up against is likely to be stiff competition, Chris. But that's also why you were chosen to present, because you're an excellent presenter with good thinking too. So.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you.
I know it to be true. Yogesh, another person? Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot of great ones amongst us here. And I just want to give a quick
Oh, yeah.
welcome also to Joe Levetta's here, and she is our newest member of MRxPros, and she's here today. So welcome.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here. New member 2 days ago. Sorry for my voice. I have a little
No,
bit of
fine.
cold. Yeah, but
So
I'm
questions for
interested to,
Tom.
yeah,
Go
Lauren,
ahead.
sorry. Yeah, I'm interested. So Dean has a question about, yeah, clients maybe thinking of some questions might be leading, because I also have that kind of question
Oh,
in my
yeah.
mind while Tom was going through the presentation.
That is a very good point. Because as I'm noticing Dean's question in the chat right now. Yes, there are clients who are apt to see leading where it isn't really, to misinterpret things like clarification and restatement as leading. One of the ways you protect yourself from that is, first of all, just how I said that psychics will establish a preemptive excuse for failure. Preempting accusations of leading is a general good, smart practice in qualitative. And one of the ways that I do that is by writing certain kinds of, I guess I would call them risky questions into my guide. So that way, when I'm talking to my client about our upcoming research, I can specifically focus on those questions and say, here's why I'm doing this. Here's why it could be potentially seen as being a leading question, but it actually isn't. Here's how I'm going to use it. So getting out in front of it is the key to making sure that you've minimized the risk. So it's a good question.
And you would never lead with a leading question, right? I would start a conversation with a question and then maybe pepper in some.
Yes.
But
The
not
other thing
never,
is,
never start with it.
and listen, let's be honest, leading questions do have their uses. If you're trying to assess somebody's commitment to a specific point of view, you might really, really try to get them to change their mind. So if somebody absolutely loves the concept that you've been showing, after
Yes.
you have fully established that and you've talked it totally to death, I might try to talk them out of it. And I will let the client know in advance that I'm going to do that so that they'll understand why I am desperately trying to lead this person someplace. But yes, yeah, the idea that you should never ever lead, that there's never ever an excuse for it is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had experience where clients really squirm when you say, I'm going to ask leading questions, but bear with me because this is
Yeah.
where we're going and why. And they're always like, this makes me uncomfortable. And then later they're like, oh, wow.
The other application here is that if, let's say, the client's idea is absolutely tanking, just going down, trailing smoke and parachutes, and they're getting really pissed off in the back room, it might be in your interest as a researcher to kind of fight for the idea. Obviously, you've got to be very careful about where the line is and how you interpret the conversation after the fact, but it might be the politic thing to do.
I know there's got to be some good questions out there. Come on.
I'll take lousy questions. That's fine.
So when do I sign up for an intuition class?
And if you show me where an intuition class is happening, I'll probably go, and I will probably drag my wife.
Oh, there's one actually happening about 2 blocks from my house tomorrow.
I'll be down there. Just let me know where and when and what to wear.
Sure. Something
What
comfy.
to wear.
Something off the shoulder, I'm thinking.
No, just comfy.
Okay.
Because you got to sit.
Off the shoulder is never comfy.
No.
Yoga pants.
You have
It's
a
yoga
question.
pants.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Tom. Thanks for the plug.
No problem.
Appreciate it. So one of your points about, being a little bit of a like, hey, I get you, like that commonality type of response. I once interviewed I think he was an endocrinologist, and it was very early in the morning too. And I was presenting 3 different positioning statements, and he had to pick one to help refine what he was seeing, analyzing, word in the words and how they were, constituted in the statement. And he says, they're all bad. And I said, well, doctor, I agree with you. Like, I just agreed with him. I said, I agree with you. They're all pretty, they all are kind of in the tank, but can you help me make one of them better? And
it's kind of what I call the tallest dwarf question.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, they all suck, but let's pick one, the one that's most sucky, and let's make it better. So he was down for that. So
the other thing you can do is you can go after selective resonance. You could say, look, I realize that all of these things are just terrible for you. They're really not talking to you. But is there anything in here, however tiny, that actually is somehow connecting with you?
Yeah.
The answer may be no, but you never know.
Right. Cool. All good stuff, Tom.
By the way, when they say there really is nothing in their connecting, either they're not paying attention or there's something really insightful in that. Like if you have a good spectrum and none of that is hitting.
Right. You could also turn the question around and say,
work in my future. If they don't like any of this, we have to go back.
Right.
Business development.
You can also turn that around then and say, okay, if nothing's connecting, what's the most alienating thing or the least alienating thing here for you?
Which
There's
I
always
would
something
argue
to talk
is a
about.
connection.
Yeah.
I would argue that's still a connection.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would too. I was just thinking the same thing. Okay, what's your push away from that? What's your turn off?
Yeah.
I think this is all great, and I think your next round is from a business development standpoint is networking for introverts, because I think so much of this, people don't like going to networking events and starting that conversation. So I think this is great stuff.
Anybody remember Peter Totman's presentation that he did at the Denver QRCA conference on introverts? One of the best conference presentations I've ever seen by anybody anywhere was Toddy's presentation on being an introvert in this profession.
Yeah.
And most introverts who do this profession are really good at it.
Well,
I'm not taking credit for what you just said, but I am. If you were to look at my Myers-Briggs, I am way over towards the I side of that continuum.
more importantly, he focused on participants who are introverts and how hard it is to get them there and
Mhm.
how to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Excellent. I have a question for you, Tom. Have you been to any of the types of people? Have you been to all of them? And if you had a choice where you really felt it might be helpful to you in some way, would you go to a palm reader or who would you go to?
I'm not sure that I would focus. First of all, I have had a lot of interactions with these people, and most of them, my poor wife has been dragged along, um, and you should see her standing there rolling her eyes at the questions I'm asking, the things I'm saying. But anyway, um, I'm not sure that I would so much differentiate by the kinds of tools they use. You know, a scryer versus a tower reader. You know, whatever. What's more important to me is how these people establish connection and how skillfully they guess, how skillfully they're able to use vagueness. That would be the person with whom I'd most want to, you know, rub elbows.
Interesting.
I don't know how to raise my hand on Zoom, so I
You
have
did
to
it. You
just
did
raise
it
my
the real way. You did it
You
the
yeah.
did it
old-fashioned way.
perfectly.
Yeah, so this isn't so kind of well piggybacking on Janet's what Janet just mentioned. I've seen the amazing Kreskin many, many, many times, and he is truly, truly amazing. He was truly
Yeah, he
amazing.
died
I'm
about a year ago.
sorry. I'm so sorry that I was very sad when he passed away. But he was also an entertainer and a performer. But he really, really got it down. And I mean, out of all the times I've seen him, I've probably seen him maybe 5 or 6 times. And I think maybe he got one thing wrong once. And I
Yeah,
mean, he used to do this among like hundreds and hundreds of people. It was amazing. So, and that's why he's the amazing.
he was
So,
amazing.
yeah, and I'm sure that you know, and he was from New Jersey.
I knew Kreskin. Kreskin
Oh,
was a
yeah.
friend of our family. He was my dad. My dad was an accountant. Kreskin was his most famous client.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so and Kreskin was very nice to me, particularly when I was coming out of college and I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know, he lived in
He could have
Caldwell.
told you what he could
What
have
he
told
did,
you.
what he did is he helped me think about it
Yeah.
in a really astute and really empathetic way.
Yeah,
Um,
and for how good he was, I
right.
was surprised he didn't reach higher fame. I mean, maybe that's because, you know, he was big in the 70s and 60s and 70s and but,
I think he was on Carson more than anybody else.
maybe. He was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I wanted to mention, and I'm sure everyone of a certain age remembers him. And then the second thing is I also have been to some mediums in a place called Lilydale, New York, which is near Chautauqua. And I think I've been there
Very
maybe
hippy dippy
three
town.
times. Yeah, where? Who?
A very hippy dippy town.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I think maybe I've been there 3 times. And one time, there was one, the very first time I ever went, I was a kid, maybe I was 19. And she said some things that really could not be explained in any other way. Just
Hmm.
absolutely. And they weren't these generalizations either. I mean, they were very, very specific. So,
When we
I mean,
come to
that's
the
one of
picnic,
those like
it's what we all
really
dreamt
kind
of
of
then.
things, you know? Um, and then I recently watched a documentary about Nostradamus, and one of the like academic talking heads on there was talking about how Nostradamus, now of course he's had what hundreds and hundreds of years of centuries
Yeah.
to accumulate credibility. But one of the academic talking heads talked about like, obviously the more data, it's kind of along the lines of a clock is right at least
Twice a
two
day.
times a day. Yeah, so or well, not at least. It's right 2 times a day. Um, or even a broken clock is right 2 times a day. So in a way you could say Nostradamus, and he was general enough not to
Mhm.
be, to have to be um held to account or whatever. I guess we'll see in the year 3937 when the human race ends, but
That's a
um
pretty safe bet, if you ask me. But
yeah, 3937 or
well,
something
by
like
39, 37.
yeah, by 30. No, I think he says it's that year that it's going to
Okay.
happen. So
Okay.
we'll
Well,
see. But it's about like it's like this large language model, like the way AI works. Like he's, he's able to see certain patterns or was able to see certain patterns. And if you just keep repeating that through, hundreds of years, yeah, you're going to be right eventually. So that's not related to qualitative research, but
I think we're all still mulling all of the different things that you put out, Tom. I mean, that was a lot of content in a short amount of time. And it's like, I feel like come back in 3 hours and I'll have more questions for you. And maybe tomorrow
That's why
morning.
God gave us email.
Yeah.
Tom, I posted in the chat. There's 3 organizations out there. I've been listening to a podcast that are mentioned that they are actually testing with double-blind studies certain of these skills. So
I wish them luck. I mean, nobody ever won the Randy Prize. Anybody know what the Randy Prize was? The Randy Prize was established by James Randi, one of the great magicians of all time. And it got to be $1 million. I think he established the Randy Prize in like 1964, and it went through. He died in 2016, I want to say. Anyway, it got up to be $1 million for anybody who could demonstrate paranormal phenomena or abilities in a duplicable laboratory setting. And nobody ever won it. And the money was rolled over into a foundation that still exists.
We're going to talk paranormal. I got all kinds of stuff.
thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Stuff always so thought-provoking.
But now I have a question, and I'm sorry if I'm revealing what I wasn't supposed to, but what were you concerned might not land well?
I have had over time conversations with people about this, and bear in mind, I'm a skeptic, I definitely go with Occam's razor that, the simplest and explanation that requires the fewest assumptions is probably the best one. When you hear hoofbeats, don't look for zebras. And so I think that I've had some situations where people felt disrespected that I was not willing to go with them where they were taking an experience. And, maybe I could have been more tactful. Knowing me, I probably could have. Maybe there's nothing I could have done that would have avoided that. But I have had the experience of people not reacting well. In particular, if you're at any kind of an event where this sort of thing is going on, go to a yoga studio open house where all kinds of practitioners of stuff like this are hawking their wares or just chatting and making contacts and stuff like that. And you will very quickly pick up on how careful you need to be about what you say and how you say it. Because people can get really aggressive for a variety of reasons.
Offensive.
I have a question. Sorry, I have a question actually. So I'm curious, when you've engaged with these individuals and you've seen these patterns and these techniques, what's your experience in whether they really believe in what they're doing, or if they're really intentionally just using these techniques to do a performance, or I don't know the right terminology. I think you probably understand the intent of the question, but just like trying to get a sense of like, do they really believe and authentically this is something they think they're doing, or is it more of a show? I don't know.
I think there are 3 possible answers to that question. The first is, I think some of them genuinely don't believe it or are almost positive they don't believe it, but they're good at it and they see it providing genuine benefits to the people on the other side of the table, and they enjoy it and they keep doing it. I think there are people who absolutely do believe it. They are there. And then I think there's more than a few, and I've had conversations with people around this, so I'm quite sure I'm right about this. I think a lot of people who do this don't really think about it too much, don't really think about whether or not there's any sort of scientific validity here or anything like that. They enjoy it, they do it, They love talking to people. I almost every time I meet a practitioner of these arts, the first question I ask them is, what do you get out of this? And the answer I get more than any other is, I just love talking to people. And I get that. So I think some of them are more introspective and come out in one position or another, and some of them don't think about it at all. They're just moving forward. They're doing what they do.
Interesting. I've had funny occasions where I had a client who kept telling me she was convinced that I was psychic because I was always asking the probes that she wanted me to ask without her, like she was trying to
Yes.
get me like a note from the back room. And I'm like, but then I told her, I said, well, who knows? But I'll tell you, I just spend a lot of time making sure I really, really understand what you're trying to learn so that I can do my job well, you know. And I was like,
No, no, no. The
I
correct
leave it out there of
response,
who knows, but she was convinced I was psychic, and I just thought it was hilarious.
the correct response to that is yes. Yes, I am. I am psychic.
Like, I don't know, maybe. It was funny, but yeah, it's interesting to me when you're making those connections because I've seen some of that show up in how I just have intuitively learned to
Yeah.
do what I do, and I'm like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. I mean, look,
Yeah.
look, think about what intuition is. Intuition is being able to process a lot of information against your own lived experience very quickly.
Mhm.
And it can look spooky,
Yeah,
but it's not.
yeah, it's fascinating, really
But
interesting.
it's also being able to read your client and
Yeah.
anticipate their needs and be
Yeah.
really well prepared. I mean, you can have zilch intuition, but be super well prepared and do that, Jody. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do prepare quite a bit, and
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things I do very intentionally to make that work for me and for the clients. But they look at it as because they don't see all of that, right? They look at it as, wow, how does she do that? And I'm like, oh, it's just what I do, right? That's just
You know,
interesting.
was it Ray
And
Bradbury who said that technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic?
yes,
There you go.
exactly,
There you go.
exactly. And I'm not trying to claim I'm psychic. I just think it's funny because she was
You're
so
definitely psychic.
convinced. She was so convinced, and I was laughing about it. Like, sure, if you want to believe that, it's all good. Just keep hiring me. It's funny.
Oh, see, I'm kind of a smart aleck, and so I probably would have said, oh, that only applies when I'm wearing my hat with the magic powers, and I didn't bring that today.
Funny. Yeah, no, it was very interesting. I'm glad that I got a chance to see this because I was disheartened that I missed it at the conference. But again, that time slot, I think we've all
That
said
time slot was
that was a wicked time slot. So
It
when I saw
was.
this, I'm like, finally, I get to hear about this topic. So thank you for that, Tom. It's really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I keep thinking about how this could be used in family situations, and I'm going to have to run through it again with different scenarios in my head than the client problems that I was thinking about.
Try it in the next social situation you're in, you know, and when I first started doing this, I actually would write down a few Barnum statements to deploy during, you know, Thanksgiving dinner or something like that. But if you write it down, then you'll remember to do it. And I promise you, report back, but I promise you, you will be shocked at how well it works.
I'm going to say a very quick thank you, Tom, on the live recording before I end it. Stuff. Just wanted to make sure that was in there for the record because we're extremely grateful for all your presentations you've done on behalf of MRxPros and always inspiring.
It amazes me that there's a group of people that actually wants to listen to what I have to say. So,
well, you know,
Nancy is not the only one, Tom. It's quite fascinating.
Cal Nancy.